As far as the U.S. was concerned, what we knew is that Bo Xilai's police chief went to the U.S. Embassy in February, and we thought that's kind of where it ended, but you've gotten more details about what exactly happened in that encounter.
Right. What's interesting is that the details of what actually occurred to that meeting have been very difficult to come by. And so there's been a great deal of speculation, most of it suggesting that he was seeking asylum. But the indications that I've gotten from the sources I've spoken with and colleagues have spoken with is that his goal was actually just to avoid being picked up by his then former boss's henchmen, because Mr. Wang, the police chief, actually had been among Bo Xilai's enforcers, and he was quite aware of, their methods and what they were capable of. And so, what we've been told by both U.S. and Chinese officials is that their understanding is that Mr. Wang, the police chief, went to the U.S. Consulate mainly because he was just looking for a place where he could avoid being picked up by Mr. Bo's sort of enforcers, and where he could contact the Beijing central government and connect up with them. That was indeed facilitated, and the authorities came and collected Mr. Wang on February 7th, and he has not been seen or heard from since. So it's not clear whether or not that was ultimately the safer call on his part, but that seems to have been his primary purpose in going to the U.S. consulate, just sort of a safe harbor, so to speak.
And the fact that the U.S., again, we kind of thought they had turned him down for asylum, not wanting to anger China, but in fact they facilitated, like you said, his potential escape to Beijing. What does that mean for the U.S. moving forward? That means they're involved in this scandal a little bit more than we had known before.
Well, it means that they're certainly involved in this. They weren't necessarily asking for it, but it does mean that, particularly from a diplomatic standpoint, they need to be very careful not to appear to be trying to influence the ultimate outcome, because there are lots of people certainly throughout either the Chinese government or even in the Chinese public who are keen to point to foreign intervention and use that as a reason to sort of hold it against the United States or any other country that might be seen as trying to have influence behind the scenes. And that in part explains why, particularly on the U.S. side, officials have been so hesitant to say anything about what transpired in that meeting or anything that's happened since, except for to say that they do not know, they haven't seen or heard from Mr. Wang since that February 6th and 7th meeting.
Siobhan, I'm curious. Mr. Wang, of course, was the police chief in Chongqing. Basically worked for Bo Xilai, is there a possibility? Do U.S. officials suspect, or is there any suspicion that he may actually have been involved in some of the things that Bo Xilai and his wife are being accused of now? I mean, he obviously was a former confidant of them. Is there a possibility that this thing gets even more tangled up, or is everyone just saying, oh, he was unhappy with what was happening and he seems relatively innocent and just wanted to escape Bo Xilai and his people?
Well, that's not clear, and I haven't been able to get a specific answer to that question. But what people will say is that Mr. Wang was definitely known to be an unsavory character himself. And so he may or may not have been caught up in the types of activities that Mr. Bo has now been charged with, which are pretty vague, but seem to boil down essentially to corruption. He may or may not have been involved in that, but he certainly was involved in, sort of the aggressive enforcement tactics that Mr. Bo was employing. And I think that just makes it even more delicate for the U.S. to deal with, because in the past, there have been a very few episodes of the U.S. indeed granting asylum to Chinese, dissidents and things like that. But that isn't really the case with this particular situation.